So for today's agenda, we'll be talking about the GSK Pharmaceutical, which is a UK pharmaceutical company. The analysis will basically focus on two reports. One is the annual report of 2024. The other one is the responsible business performance report of 2024. Our structure of this presentation, we will first look at the introduction. Then we'll move on to the analysis of priority ESG issue, and moving on to the application of Green Horizon investment framework, and finally on the investment recommendations. And based on all those information, we'll summarize it in the impact formula and the non-financial performance measurements and engagement. So let's start with the introduction. GSK operates within the pharmaceutical sector, facing escalating regulatory pressure and increasing market demands for sustainable healthcare solutions. This sector's high Scope 3 emissions and intensifying EU climate regulations underscores the urgent financial imperative for transition. GSK uniquely aligns with Green Horizon objectives, demonstrating SBTi-approved targets: 80% emissions reduction by 2030, transparent ESG disclosures, and significant innovation in low-carbon inhalers. Selecting GSK strategically leverages the fund's transition finance criteria to actively mitigate sectorial emissions, creating measurable ESG impacts and clear financial outperformance potential, thus advancing Green Horizon's investment mandate and sustainability goal. Now moving on to part 2 of the presentation, which is analysis of priority ESG issues. Given GSK's position in the emission-intensified pharmaceutical sector, 3 ESG issues GSK addressed stands out the most financially material and aligned with the Green Horizon Fund's criteria. The first issue is the carbon emission reduction, especially on Scope 1 and 2. GSK set an ambitious target of 80% absolute reduction in Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030, backed by the SBTi, Science-Based Target Initiative. Achieving these targets directly address regulatory risk, notably compliance costs associated with tightening EU carbon pricing policies. Financially, GSK's significant investment of £1 billion into renewable electricity, with a 90% adoption currently, directly reduce operational energy costs and mitigates long-term carbon liabilities, enhancing profitability and investor attractiveness. For issue 2, product innovation on low-carbon inhalers. A pivotal ESG innovation is GSK development of low-carbon inhalers, offering a 90% reduction in greenhouse gases compared to traditional propeller-based inhalers. This innovation meets with the growing market demand for sustainable healthcare solutions, providing a clear competitive differentiation and strengthening GSK pricing power and market shares. This puts GSK in a strong financial position as regulatory scrutiny increases, particularly under EU pharmaceutical emissions guidelines, thereby safeguarding revenue streams and boosting long-term profitability. For issue 3, supply chain decarbonization, mainly on Scope 3 emissions. With Scope 3 emissions representing approximately 80% of GSK total carbon footprint, robust management of suppliers' emissions is critical. GSK approach requires suppliers to adopt SBTi-approved targets, directly translate into reduced operational and reputational risk. Improved suppliers' efficiency decrease long-term operational costs and supply chain disruption risk, fortifies the company's resilience, and enhance brand reputation, ultimately contributing positively to valuation and reduced cost of capital. Now moving on to the third part of the presentation, which is talking about the application of Green Horizon investment framework. First, we look at the exclusionary screening. GSK clearly meets with the Green Horizon Fund's exclusionary criteria. It does not engage in fossil fuel extraction, mining, or other environmental degradation sectors, and faces no critical ESG controversies, as evidenced by the latest ESG audits and disclosures. Now moving on to the positive screening. GSK aligns positively with our fund's criteria through significant energy efficiency and carbon reduction innovations. Specifically, GSK's development of low-carbon inhalers, offering a 90% reduction in inhalers propellant emissions, representing a meaningful energy efficiency and carbon reduction solutions within the healthcare sector. This directly contributes to transitioning the sectors towards sustainability, meeting our fund's objective of investing in eco-centric innovations. Now moving to the final criteria, which is investment universe criteria. Gsk fulfills these criteria through documented ESG commitments and performance metrics. The company adherence SBTi standards, including a target of an 80% emission reduction by 2030, perfectly aligns with our fund's minimal standards. Additionally, GSK's transparent ESG disclosure independently verifies and aligns with global standards like the GRI and TCFD, further enforce its eligibility. Now moving on to the investment recommendation. I personally recommend inclusion of GSK in Green Horizon funds with an overweight position. This decision leveraged a clear alignment of GSK's ESG targets with financial outperformance potential. This type of active ownership will focus on accelerating GSK's timeline for low-carbon inhalers development and enhancing Scope 3 supplier alignment, further strengthening ESG integration. Now let's summarize everything in the impact formula. First is the intention, targeting significant sectorial carbon emissions reduction and positioning GSK as a market leader in sustainable healthcare products. For the design, by deploying transition financing tied to achieving specific carbon milestones, such as full implementation of renewable electricity and accelerated adoption of low-carbon inhalers. For the resource, GSK provide robust Scope 3 emission data, a strong supply engagement network requiring SBTi targets, and substantial financial resources. Allocating to sustainability, which around £1 billion capex planned. Finally, for the environment, GSK operates within a rapidly evolving external context driven by first, tightening emission regulations, second, escalating carbon pricing pressures, third, increasing investors' demand for credible ESG performers. Now moving to the final section of the presentation, which is non-financial performance management and engagement. First, we look at the metrics measurement. Our funds employ clear, measurable indicators for monitoring GSK's ESG progress. For the carbon emissions, an annual independently audited tracking Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reductions against the 80% by 2030 targets. Second is the renewable energy adoption. Quarterly ESG reporting measures progress towards 100% renewable electricity usage. Third is the sustainable products revenue. Annual assessment quantifying the percentage revenue growth derived from sustainable innovation, notably low-carbon inhalers. Now moving on to the engagement strategy. Green Horizon will engage with GSK management to first, accelerate the deployment timeline for low-carbon inhalers. Second, set more Scope 3 emission reduction targets for suppliers. Third, establish additional milestones aligned with the SBTi pathway. So now, back to the final question. How does this all mitigate greenwashing? The answer is by committing independently audited transparency and quarterly ESG performance updates and annual impact reporting, ensuring a credible measurement and effectively minimizing risk through verified data and clear practices.